to this discussion, which was a roundtable coming out of 19 policy response group that we had created and developed during the COVID-19 crisis. But yesterday we put a focus on Kenya, and today we are putting a focus on India, two of the countries that really stood out in developing large teams and helping us to build this database rapidly. And I'm really excited to have this discussion today with a leading professional, attorney at law from India, Anubha Rastogi, who has vast experience in the human rights arena. She is a special prosecutor, as well with the Securities and Exchange Commission and Board in India. And Anubha was instrumental during the global COVID-19 policy response in garnering the support and contribution of students at the university, law students, to help building this database in an innovative way that India was the only country that was able to spearhead it in the way that Anubha led. And I'm really excited to sit and have this conversation with Anubha today about her experience and what brought her to the project and how it went. And then we could also look a little bit and take your questions on where we see ourselves going from here. Welcome, Anubha. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. This is a wonderful space that you guys have created. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I see we have Thandeka here as well from South Africa. Thandeka is a doctoral researcher in South Africa. And if we do have the opportunity, we'd love to bring Thandeka into the conversation to talk about what was the experience of in South Africa during COVID-19. But if we have time, we will come down to that at the end. So Anubha, you know, I did do a little introduction of you, but maybe you can, you know, do an introduction of yourself for everyone.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and very good afternoon. I mean, I'm in Bombay. It's afternoon here. It's post-lunch. Thanks, Margaret, for introducing me. Very, very briefly, I'm a practicing lawyer. I practice in the courts of Mumbai in India. And I've been practicing for the past about 16 years now. A lot of my work revolves around access to human rights, women's rights. And I also now, because I'm a special prosecutor for the Securities and Exchange Board of India, I do a lot of prosecution of economic offenses, especially in the stock market, etc. That's very, very briefly about me. There's a lot of work that I do around access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, and specifically access to abortion in India. If we get a chance, I'll definitely like to talk a little bit more about that, but we'll see. So I'm just going to dive right into the GCPR work, Margaret.
What brought you to the project and
right. Okay, so it's actually very interesting. I was working with someone with Sandeep Narwani, who does a lot of work with parliamentarians here in India, and we were working as a group. We were working with him on a specific bill that is being brought in the country on access to abortion. And in that context, you know, he shared with me about the GCPR project, and he asked me if I'm interested in it. He said, at least, well, come in for a meeting, hear it in, and see what you think, and then if you like it, you can, you know, you can decide. So that's how I actually walked into this space of the global COVID policy research team, and I met all these wonderful people, Margaret, Anya, and everyone else. And yeah, I mean, when I walked in, I mean, one of my first, you know, my instinctive reaction was that, oh my God, this is huge. Are we really going to track all of the policies across the world? And I mean, if we are able to do that, that will be just fantastic and fabulous. And we will actually have one space where we will be able to see that how did the world really react to it? and who did what, and who, what were the best practices, and what is stuff that you shouldn't do again, and how do you from there move ahead. So I thought that was a very, very innovative idea and very interesting space to be part of.
And
um, yeah, so yeah, that's how I walked in, Margaret.
And I just wanted to jump in for those who don't know anything about the project and those who'll be watching the replays as well. In March 2020, the Future Law Institute put out a call to lawyers all over the world to come and help build a database mapping the government policy responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Because if you all would recall, there were massive policy changes taking place. Laws usually take so long to pass, but in the COVID-19, sometimes on a daily, sometimes on a weekly basis, governments were passing new laws and new policies, and that were having varied impacts on the rights of citizens. And so the whole impetus and drive for the project was, we need to at least capture in real time, map these policies, and then seek to do the deeper research to see the patterns and all of the trends, and therefore to be able to develop better preparedness plans and intervention points. And so just wanted to put that up front for those who don't know anything about the project. And Anubha is one of the lawyers from India who really was instrumental in building out that database. And really quickly, we now have a global policy response database that is searchable, accessible by all. You can access it through our website, gcpr.io, or at futurelaw.io. There are over 10,000 rows of policy data for over 196 countries. And so, so you came in and you were like, yeah, I want to get involved in this project, Anubha, just like over 180 lawyers from all over the world also joined. Tell us about your experience trying to capture these policies and map them, and what you then decided to do.
So like I said, when I walked in, I saw that, we were tracking the policies across the world. And I thought that maybe one of the things that we really definitely need to do, especially in a country like India, is to also see what are the courts doing. Because the manner in which the government functions here, what the judiciary does, what the judiciary says, what the courts say is also an extremely important aspect. And it's the courts have law making power. It's not just the interpretation of law, but also whatever they say is law, especially the Supreme Court for the entire country, and the high courts for their territorial jurisdictions. So, and right from the beginning, from the time we started with the lockdown in India, the courts were taking a very, very proactive steps in looking at various aspects, prisoners' rights, ensuring that the jails are not overcrowded, to looking at health rights, etc. So I thought one of the most important pieces, especially in the India story, would be to look at what were the courts doing during the lockdown. And I sort of mooted this idea within the India team, and then we shared it with everyone in GCPR, that maybe we separately should also track the litigation that took place during the lockdown, and fit that in to see how much of access to justice was really there. Because obviously when there is a lockdown, even the courts are under lockdown. And the access to the court, to the legal system, is also only on very urgent basis. So I was very curious to see how have the courts decided what is urgent. How are the courts ensuring that access to justice still continues? Because that is an extremely important aspect of fundamental rights and human rights, and how negotiable do they really become during a pandemic. So we decided that we really need to specifically look at this piece of what were the courts doing during the lockdown, and track that as a story in itself within the India piece. So yeah, that's what we started with. And obviously, I mean, we have one Supreme Court and we have 25 high courts in this country. So it's not something that a person or two people could do. And therefore we decided that we need to also, bring on board a lot of students. So we at one point in time, we had close to 20 interns working with us on this project. We came out with a sheet which was shared with everyone, and we ensured that we were following all the parameters that the global team is following, so that the data can always be matched. Yeah. And the categorization of the entries is also as similar as possible. And similarly, then we wanted to see what were the procedural aspects. So where courts were only accessible virtually, how accessible they still were. That's where we really began, when we started somewhere around in April, Margaret.
And one of the things that we noticed all over the world is that what we as lawyers were lobbying for the judges and the court system to go online for years, and we got a lot of resistance for it, like almost overnight. COVID forced courts to go online. How did that transition go in India? Was it smooth? Are there any access to justice considerations that arose during that time from your research?
So let me also just put it out there that the research is still very much ongoing, because we're still in lockdown, you know. So we're still putting things together, and it's now been 8 months that the courts have been accessible only virtually. There has been a little bit of physical hearing that has started, but that's only very, very recently. But to answer your question, Margaret, yes, there has been a lot of resistance, not only from the bench, but even from the bar, even from lawyers, even from litigants, to have virtual hearings as an option. And it is the pandemic which really pushed us to ensure that we actually take that step, because the system was already there. The computers, the infrastructure, all of that was already there. We were just not using it because physical hearings were in any case taking place. While it did push us to have an alternate system where you can sit either in your own office or at home and access courts, and you don't really have to travel, as a lawyer, you can access various courts sitting in front of your computer or your phone. The flip side of that is that not everyone can do that. So initially, it immediately on its own weeded out lawyers and litigants who were not net savvy. And I mean, let's be very, very clear that not everyone is equally informed about how the internet works, how the systems work. Right. Either it's because of age, or it's because of the kind of access that they do have. So it immediately, like right at that doorstep, you had a whole set of people which were left out. And only the people who then had a good internet connection, had a system, could really walk into the space of the virtual hearings. I think today, 8 months later, we are in a much, much better situation. That's, of course, my own analysis of this. But we still, I wouldn't still say that virtual hearings is the way to go. As an option, yes, we must have it. It makes a lot of economic sense. It makes a lot of sense even in terms of what kind of representation you can have, even as a litigant, because otherwise you are restricted to the lawyers who practice in that particular court physically. But if it's a virtual hearing, you have the entire country where you can pick your lawyer from. So in that sense, of course, it's very liberating. But unless it becomes a level playing field, I think we will still find that there will be a lot of people, a lot of issues, and a lot of concerns which will get left out, which have gotten left out. The other thing that I definitely want to bring in is that, and this is again something that we're looking at we as a team are also writing about, is that how were the courts defining an urgent hearing? So is it only life and liberty? Are we also talking about socioeconomic rights? Are we only talking about civil political rights? We did see that while in March, end of March and almost all of April, the only matters that were actually getting heard were either bail hearings or anything related to COVID. But as May, June rolled in, we saw that even civil suits, property disputes, they were also being heard. So I mean, one of the things that we're also trying to understand is this notion of urgency. Is it only urgent when your lawyer is able to make out a really good case of it being urgent? Or are there criterias, and do those criterias differ from court to court?
Yeah.
So that that's also something that we are currently looking at, and we hope to write about that soon enough based on the data that we've collected. The second thing that I definitely, or the third thing rather, that I definitely want to also discuss is, I mean, initially there were a lot of, you know, birth pangs. We were not clear about even which, you know, which system to use. For example, you know, we started using Zoom, then there were privacy concerns, then we went to WebEx. We do know that a lot of high courts are using very, very different platforms. So there's no uniformity even in the platforms that are being used for virtual court hearings, even at the Supreme Court and the High Court level. Like, it's not like all the higher courts are doing the same thing. No, they are not. So I think we also, I mean, there's a lot of scope there for us to also advocate for some sort of a guiding set, guiding principles, guidelines on how do we really ensure that virtual hearings do remain as an option, and how does one really go about that uniformly across the country?
Yeah,
Margaret.
And in your research, did any litigants challenge the virtual hearings in India?
You know, it would be very strange because you would challenge the virtual hearing virtually, because there was no other option. I mean, you couldn't do anything else. It's only I think in end of August that some courts started physical hearings. That also only for like you know, pending criminal appeals which have been admitted close to 10-15 years ago. And the courts wanted to start hearing them also because, you know, that when a criminal appeal is being heard on, you know, where either an acquittal or a conviction has been challenged in the higher court, that argument in itself takes almost an entire day because you have to go through the entire evidence and all of that. So that ensures that there aren't too many people in the courtroom physically. But to the best of my knowledge, I'm not very certain if the aspect of virtual hearing was really challenged in its entirety, because frankly, there was no other option. If we refuse this virtual hearing system and there is a lockdown and we can't access courts physically, then for all practical purposes, we can't access justice. So I mean, I don't think, to the best of my knowledge, no one did actually challenge that as an aspect itself.
Right.
There were a lot of challenges where, for example, a high court, you know, decided that a particular matter that is listed is not urgent.
Right.
So that order was then challenged before the Supreme Court. You know, so I mean, there are instances of those. For example, I know that a particular high court would actually have a bench dedicated only to deciding whether matters that are being listed are urgent or not. And so they were passing orders on the judicial side. And then, you know, if they decided that it wasn't urgent, then, you know, there have been challenges to those orders. While there are some other high courts which were looking at this aspect only from the administrative side. You know, so no judicial orders are being passed. It's an administrative decision of whether, you know, a particular bail matter or X kind of bail matters are urgent or not, or any other kind of matters are urgent or not.
And you and your team of like 15 law students, you were able to put together over 1,000 rows of data on the litigation.
Oh, much more.
Much more now, I should check.
Yes, much more.
I keep saying we have 10,000 rows of data. That's the last time I checked, but you may have, oh my gosh.
I mean, we have a lot more. I'm telling you, I'm knee deep into those rows at this point. I really don't know where to go with so much data suddenly.
That's great. That's great. And so what I would like to talk about is a challenge that I think we experienced in India and in some of the other countries. What are the challenges in getting machine readable documents to be uploaded into the database, because one of the unique things about our global COVID-19 policy database, which is why it is, the most comprehensive and accessible resource online in COVID-19 policies, is that we weren't putting down secondary information about laws and policies. We were actually sourcing and uploading the hard policies themselves. But I know that there were language issues as in terms of some of the policies across India and machine readable issues. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
Right at the outset, let me say that while maybe for gathering the policies, we may have been able to use, AI, but for gathering case law, for gathering the orders that are getting passed, it's absolutely not possible. Because each high court has its own way of, on their website of saving those orders. So it's for every high court, then you have to do a separate system. And then in each high court, every kind of case, for example, if we are looking at writ petitions, so that will be saved in a different format. If we are looking at bail applications, that's a different format. So, and I mean, that's also one of the reasons why I did, and I still do have a big team, is because this will have to be done manually. Yeah. Each person will have to go to the High Court website and look at the orders that are passed on every day that they were sitting and then categorize them. So as far as case, judgments are concerned and really looking at what the courts were doing, the use of, it wasn't machine readable at all. Yeah, because the way the data is saved, it's very, very different.
Yeah, a lot of times you would find, and we found this in several countries, I would say evolving economies, I like to call, they would save policies as JPEGs and as images, and so we weren't able to read it. Anubha, now that was your practical experience in the GCPR. I want to turn now to the human rights issues that you would have been tracking and you've been looking at in Bombay, in the broader India territory. What would you say are the human rights issues that you flagged during the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing? Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest things that we did, actually there are a whole lot of issues. But I think one of the biggest things that we did have to deal with was the movement of people, the migrants. Because immediately after the lockdown, initially the understanding was that probably the lockdown is for about 2, 3, 4 weeks. But as soon as it started dawning in that this is going to stay and we don't know when this is getting over, a lot of people who were dependent on daily wages, on daily work, started losing work, and because they had no further access to food and money, and even the transport system was shut. There were no trains, there were no buses plying. So we saw a whole lot of people who started walking back to their villages. And we know that a whole lot of people also died in that process. So while we did lose a lot of lives because of COVID, because people got positive and passed away, we also lost a lot of lives as a consequence of this. That systems were not ready, systems were not in place to deal with this kind of migration. While we all know, offhand, we all know that there is a lot of economical migration that takes place in this country. But I think how huge it is something that really we were able to see when we saw these images of people, families, holding on to whatever they can in terms of their belongings and just walking thousands and thousands of kilometers back home. And so many people were not even able to reach their villages or lost their lives just outside their village because they were so tired. So, not only for the state was this something, something that they were grappling with, but even for the civil society. While both the state and the civil society did get into action in their own ways, and I'm not going to really comment on who did what and who was better, But yes, steps were taken. But I don't think they were enough as far as the state is concerned. And the civil society, the NGOs were able to do whatever they were able to do. While they were able to reach a whole lot of people, there were a whole lot of people that they were not able to reach. Just before I started with the GCPR work, I was also volunteering for a helpline, a national helpline. And I mean, believe you me, I couldn't do it more than 15 days. I was only there for 2 hours every day, but I couldn't do it for more than 15 days because it was so harrowing. What do you tell the people who are calling you every day and asking you, why are we not getting any food? Where is our ration? What are we supposed to do? Can you please send something to us? You know, and while we were through that helpline, we were constantly setting up, community kitchens and a whole lot of things. But there was still a whole lot of people that we were not able to reach. And I mean, frankly, I couldn't even do it more than 15 days because it was just getting too much for me. So I can't even imagine what the people who were actually calling us, what they were going through. And so I mean, I think that the whole migrants issue and the fact that there is no social security for the unorganized sector, I think has really, I mean, we all knew it, but we can't ignore it anymore. I think that has been one of the biggest lessons that we have had to learn. The second thing, most definitely, is the health infrastructure of the country. A pandemic has really shown us, the gap between the private health sector and the public health sector. And if the government does push the public health sector, how it can really perform. It's also an example of that, because we have been dependent a whole lot on the public health system in the past 8 months. The privates were too expensive. I mean, of course, then the courts had to step in to regulate, the prices that the private hospitals were charging. So even the governments had to step in. So, there is all of that. But it really showed us that the importance of a very, very strong public healthcare system in the country, which makes such a huge difference, where, health is accessible, affordable, and it needs to be of a quality that is acceptable. So I think that's the biggest lesson again that we've been able to sort of take back. And I think some of the things that I would definitely want to talk about from my own work that I've been doing in the past 8 months specifically is access of health services for women. Especially pregnant, lactating women, or accessing sexual and reproductive health rights and services during a situation like a lockdown. I think that has been a major issue that has also come up, during this kind of situation where you can't step out of the house, you can't speak to your doctor, you can't do anything like that. So how do you really ensure that you have the services that you need? So I would think that these have been some of the major issues that have come up. But I mean, I will go back to to the running theme for me during this entire work, and which I think will continue for me, is the access to justice, and how skewed or not it has been during the last 8 months. How have our courts functioned? What have they been doing? How have they been accessible or not? Is the story that I'm really focusing on during the pandemic, and going forth from here, Margaret.
Yeah, and looking forward in terms of India and how it has been addressing the pandemic. Can you give us a view from the ground in terms of where you think it's heading? COVID-19 rates and government policy responses?
I think I can just say this off the bat, that when we had when the lockdown was so strict, we had double-digit numbers in cases. We had 17, 20, 98, something like that, and the lockdown was really strict. We are in lakhs at this point. We are in millions basically at this point, the numbers. And every day we are adding a whole lot of numbers in terms of the people who are getting positive, in terms of the people who are dying, in terms of the people who are getting better and going back home. But everything has also opened up. And we do know, I mean, even I have gone to court now in the past 8 months. I have now gone to court in about 5 times physically. And I can see that the kind of response that the people have is one of, we'll deal with it if something happens. So I do think that going forward, we really need to be, because this is this is not going to be the last one. The way we are heading, the way, the way we are behaving as a species, I think there's a lot more of this kind of stuff that we will keep seeing. So I do think that the governments, the states, and the people have to now start really factoring this in when they, when we plan our lives, really. When we plan our own lives, and when the state plans, its budgets, how much are they going to focus on health systems, on healthcare, on social security. I think all of this is very, very important. I mean, if I speak about, say, Maharashtra, the state that that Bombay is in. So while we are grappling with the pandemic, we have had unprecedented floods and rains in this state. And we have faced so much losses in terms of, the farmers have faced unprecedented losses in terms of the grains, the vegetables, all of that. So we will have to also constantly keep factoring all of that in, that while we are dealing with the pandemic, everything else will also keep happening. And we will need to ensure that we are as ready as we can be, fiscally, with resources, with human resources, not only in terms of money and infrastructure. I think that kind of a policy emphasis is really, really important.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for that. I'm wondering whether we could bring Thandeka into the conversation just for a little bit. Thandeka, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Thandeka. Thandeka is a doctoral researcher from South Africa. And could you tell us a little bit about, during the COVID-19, and it's ongoing, as you know, what was the experience of South Africa? Share a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think just briefly, in one sentence, I can say that we learned as we went as well. It was that type of exercise. So South Africa, we often joke about it, but South Africa has thousands of laws. It has laws on everything, and it has churned out even more laws now during this period. Hard law and soft law, we've got a lot of regulations. So the big overarching one was the establishment of the state of not emergency, disaster, state of disaster, excuse me, which started towards the end of March. And since then, they have also, they have extended it. I think we've extended it now 3 times. And so we split the lockdown. We have a lockdown since March, but we split it into 5 levels. So level 5 being the most hectic, which is what we had from March. And then somewhere in April, we went down to level 4, and now we're on level 1. Mm-hmm. So level 5 was the most hectic, and it's, the consequences of that level are still present now. Excuse me. What happened at level 5 is that they shut down so many businesses. Bottle shops were shut down, cigarettes were shut down, offices were shut down, like across the board. The shopping centers were shut down. We weren't allowed to, even like your general supermarkets weren't allowed to sell everything there. So for example, you couldn't buy curtains in March or in April. And that's now the long-lasting consequence is the unprecedented loss of jobs. We already had, I think we had unemployment rates of about 33%, and we have over 50%, of people living close to or beneath the poverty line. Mm-hmm. So that has now been exacerbated. So a lot of people's right to work has been influenced. That is the biggest thing. A lot of people lost their jobs. I remember seeing in the province of Gauteng, so we have 9 provinces or states. And in that one province, I think it is 89 restaurants had to shut down. So you can imagine how many people have lost their businesses and how many people who are employed there are now no longer employed. A lot of businesses are saying that they're remaining closed because it's cheaper to remain closed than it is to implement anything, any of the measures that they have to implement. So I think that the right to work has really been affected, and people's income has been affected, and we have definitely pushed a lot more people closer to or onto the poverty line. Other rights which were grossly affected were now, for example, the right to health. So we have certain hospitals which are COVID response centers. Okay, so what that means is that if you have COVID, you have to go to that hospital. But now they're dealing with COVID almost exclusively, and they're no longer dealing with anything else, right? And that is problematic because if you have, for example, we had in KZN, a COVID center, which is in Pietermaritzburg. And it also used to deal with cancer patients. It was the only one in that whole city that was dealing with cancer patients, that was giving, the treatment that they needed. Now, having become a COVID center, anyone who needed treatment had to now travel to another hospital in Durban, which is about an hour away. So if you're thinking of someone who can really afford or can hardly afford to go to the hospital in Pietermaritzburg, how much more will they now have, that to consider in terms of how much they have to put towards traveling to Durban. And then to make things even worse, because our Department of Health wasn't really as prepared as they should have been, because there were always issues in our health sector, that hospital in Durban also had a breakout of COVID. And this now also brought to light the issue of, the doctors not having the correct PPE. So a lot of doctors have lost their lives, and other healthcare workers. We didn't have enough healthcare workers because the government started putting out adverts for anyone who is unemployed but has qualified or has recently retired to come back to work. Right, but this was done a few months later. Doctors kept talking about how they don't have the correct PPE and they're dying because they're catching COVID while they're on duty. The government first denied that for about a month or two, and then they only then started speaking about it. So now things seem to be better. We didn't have a lot of or enough space in our hospitals, which are already established, but then we built field hospitals, which as of the last address, which I think was last month, those hospitals are empty now. But it seems that since we've gone to level 1, we're now picking up again. Another thing that was brought to light are prisoners' rights. Our justice system is also a bit in shambles. So there was now an outbreak in the prisons, right? And it was in different provinces. The two that were the worst were the city called Bloemfontein in Free State, and I think East London in the Eastern Cape. Those two had the worst outbreaks. And there were a lot of people who were, for example, eligible for parole within a month or so, and they now had they had served their sentences and they were about to be released, but then they died of COVID, and this brought an outrage. So then what the government said was, they're going to let out a few thousand prisoners. Well, not prisoners per se, but people who have been remanded or, right. They're waiting to hear on bail. But the thing is that those people who are waiting on bail have been there for a year. They've been remanded for a year or more, and they should not be remanded for that time with that amount of time without being heard in front of a court of law. So it brings out two questions. Yes, you want to say, why are you letting people out of the prisons? But in the same breath, you want to say, why are you keeping people in the prisons? Because most of these people who are remanded for years on end are poor. So that now brings to light another underlying issue, that our justice system actually is not operating very well. And we're remanding people because they can't afford to pay 1,000 Rand for bail or something like that. So those issues they came to the forefront. Another one is the right to education. The right to education. Our education system is so bifurcated. The quality of education does not run across the line. We have very bad, for example, we have 5 quintiles of private schools, public schools. Quintile 5 being the one that receives the least amount of government funding because the school fees is higher, and 1 is basically a no-fee school where the government pays for everything.
Yeah.
Now, the issue is that it also goes like that with the quality. A quality of a quintile 5 school is much better than a quintile 1. Now, quintile 5s were able to, quintile 5 was able to carry on with school, right? They were able to carry on with, lessons online. They were sent, the original lockdown was supposed to be 3 weeks, although we knew it would be extended, but the first period was 3 weeks. So then those schools sent kids away with enough homework for 3 weeks. Thereafter, some schools were continuing on Zoom. Some schools were continuing to, you would go and pick up work. And then eventually, I think around level 3, schools started opening up. So for example, I have a little sister, she's in a quintile 5. And there are 28 of them in a class. Government has said there can be no more than 30 learners in a class. I know this because my mother is a teacher. Usually she has about 70 to 80 kids in a class. Yeah. So they have been told that they can only have 30 kids in the class. So my sister's school has split 28 into 2. So if you are in this first 14, if you're in 14A, then you go to school Monday, Wednesday, Friday this week, Tuesday, Tuesday, Thursday the following week, and so on. And then 14B will do the opposite of what you're doing. But they have been able to continue with school so efficiently that they are able to still write their tests and their exams. They can still be tested on content because they have been taught. My mother's school, on the other hand, which is a quintile 1, has been shut down because of COVID. School started, I think, a month late for each grade because the government had not delivered PPE. There is no running water. It is a school of over 2,000 and there's only one set of bathrooms for all the children, for one boy's bathroom, one girl's bathroom. And that is even a luxury because in other schools, they have no windows, they have pit latrines, they have no running water, they have no electricity, and so on and so forth. So they have not been able to continue with school because if we're told to wash our hands all the time, how do we do that in a school that does not have any running water? You know, lots of kids also share things like when we have feeding schemes. So you share bowls because one might not have a bowl or something like that. So they have really, I think if I'm being absolutely honest, there's no way of saving the year. There are going to be thousands, hundreds of thousands maybe of children who are not going to qualify, who are not going to be able to write their final exams, who are not going to be able to qualify for university or move on. There are lots of kids who are not going to go to the following grade because government is adamant that they're still going to test the children, but they're trying to push the school year to end in February. And yeah, so that's been very, very problematic. Let me just see if there's not anything that I've left out. Oh yes, police brutality. Oh my goodness. So we had, especially in the beginning, we had heavy military presence. And we haven't seen any soldiers on the streets. My mom says she's never seen soldiers on the streets since apartheid, you know. A lot of people were shocked. Like you keep hearing on radio or on the TV, the president keeps saying, never in the history of our democracy have we ever had a lockdown, never in the history of our democracy. And for me, it's like, okay, this is a thing that's happening. But for someone who lived pre-democracy, this is huge because it's remnant of apartheid. It's like, I can't believe this is happening in the new South Africa. So I didn't realize just how big it was. But now the police presence on the streets or the military presence on the streets is also something that didn't happen, you know, in the new democracy. And so there's a bit of a trauma there. And these military who've never had to really work like that now are out here and they've killed people. There have been quite a few killings and there was outrage about them, but then no one has been found guilty of anything. They've actually come out and said, you know, there have been, last I had checked, there had been 3 investigations, all of which acquitted the people who were involved. So that was horrible, but there were a number of people who were abused on the streets, a number of people whose businesses were shut down, a number of people whose goods were looted by the military, and a number of people who unfortunately also died. You know, and the jails, they were emptying them out and then filling the cells again, you know, with arrests for petty things. Like there was an old woman, easily in her late 60s, who's a hawker, you know, selling on the side of the street. And they told her to stop selling. So supermarkets were able to carry on selling fruits and vegetables. But if I was selling fruits and vegetables at a taxi rank or on the side of the street, that was not allowed. Yet I'm the one who would need that income even more. You get what I'm saying? So they arrested her, and we were like, why are you arresting an old lady? Just tell her to pack up. And they really did. They were assaulting her, like they were dragging her along the streets, and we're like, what is going on? Luckily, someone helped her. But this is just to show that, you know, there's been quite a lot of brutality on the streets, but now it seems like it's calmed down. So thankfully about that. But yeah, I think I've covered everything I had noted.
Yeah, that's really interesting, particularly the police brutality point, because we actually found that in mapping the policies, and particularly in Kenya and in some other African countries as well, that these extrajudicial killings and the excess use of force by police was something that we saw on the African continent, and it is certainly something that we have mapped in the context of what we're doing. Also, in terms of South Africa, we saw in the mapping of the policies, and I think when we were ranking, that South Africa's government had some of the most aggressive policies in respect of citizens' freedoms during this lockdown. I think you weren't even allowed at some point to go and buy or smoke cigarettes or something like that.
No cigarettes for, I think, 6 months. That was from March until we're in October. I think they only eased that at the end of September. Margaret, that's not even the worst. You weren't allowed to buy baby clothes in the first 3 weeks. And people had to complain. Obviously, that is an oversight, but still, you weren't allowed to move your children between provinces. So a lot of children had gone to, let's say you send your children to their grandmother for the holidays, and you think you can fetch them 3 weeks later, next thing you can't. So they were quite heavy-handed, especially in the beginning, yeah.
And I'm seeing we have a question from Marian. How do we bring about collaborative global planning for future crises? Absolutely, this is what we are trying to do. Anubha, you want to jump in and try to answer that, or shall I? Yeah.
I don't think there's, I don't think there's really like one answer. And, like you said, that's what we're trying to do here. But I mean, I do think that there is a lot of learning. And I think, we need to begin with acknowledging that we've not done everything that we could have. We were not prepared. We have, violated people's rights. We have siphoned off money. I think if we at least begin with that acknowledgement, then there is a place to go forward. Because otherwise we are just in denial. Like, no, we've done everything and everything's on paper. But actually nothing's really done. I think I would also want to just, sort of take up from what, Thandeka shared about South Africa. And which also tells me there's so many things that even I forgot to, specify. We did in India begin with Supreme Court really came sort of very detailed on the crowding of prisons, and it set up an entire system of how the courts should ensure that the prisons which are crowded and are overcrowded rather, that they are able to ensure that there isn't that much crowding, and that people are allowed to their sentences are suspended, or they are given provisional bail or something like that, to ensure that at least some kind of crowding, overcrowding stops. But what did really happen is that when they did finally come out with the guidelines, it still did leave a lot of people, for example, even even for where it's very clear that if you're above a particular age and you have other comorbidities, you are at risk. Like, those factors were not enough. The only thing that was being seen is what's the crime that you have either alleged to have committed, or that you've been convicted for. So if it is something which is sort of petty, minor kind of a thing, 7 years sentence, then yes, then you can be sort of given a sentence suspension. But your medical condition as a prisoner, your age, your comorbidities, that was not being seen at all, especially in cases of, allegations of political crimes, for example. So I think that there, while we did take fantastic steps right in the beginning, the manner in which we, curtailed it really didn't make any sense, because the reason why you were taking those steps was to ensure that people who are more at risk are not at risk, or at as less a risk as possible. But even there, we did bring in other considerations of what are the allegations, what is the conviction. And I think even I definitely do want to talk about police brutality. Thank you, Thandeka, for bringing that in. Yes, and I mean, a lot of across the board brutality that we have seen committed by the police across the country in various aspects. And I'm really not going to comment on, who was right or who was wrong, but the fact that there is power, and then there is misuse of power, and there is no accountability. So I think, because that's the message that's very clear. There is so much of abuse of power that takes place. And I think the third thing that I definitely wanted also just highlight is that when we started, opening up slightly more, in the sense that the lockdowns were easing. Of course, I have no idea why they were easing. They should have been eased out for specific categories of people for whom, it was making, it was an economic nightmare. But to open up malls and stuff, I don't know. I mean, because we are constantly seeing the numbers increasing. But even though we were opening up very, very little, courts are still shut. It's only virtual hearings. The amount of lawmaking that my country has done, the amount of laws that have changed, and these are not just related to COVID and COVID-related situations, but even otherwise. I mean, there are attempts to change the criminal justice system. There have been so many laws that have passed in the parliament without debate, without any public debate, without putting it out for public comments, and which which for any citizen is an absolutely worrying trend, because we are in a situation where we can't really do anything. Even as an aware citizen, there's not much that I can do except for maybe, tweet about it or write to my minister or something like that. But I can't really protest, because the moment I step out to protest, you will put me behind bars. And I am taking a health risk, not only for myself, but for the people around me. And in a situation like that, when you can't have public gatherings, where you can't get people together, that the government will focus on changing laws which are not required to be changed to deal with the pandemic is the most worrying trend at this point, today, that we're looking at in this country. And I'm sorry, I've really sort of gone way beyond the question that we were asking.
No, I think you've taken us right to the core of why we are doing what we are doing. And Marian's question, thank you for that question, because to me, that's what we are attempting to solve for. We have, I want to make an attempt to answer Marian's question, because it is so central to our work here. So we have the United Nations framework that is supposed to create the infrastructure for us to deal with our collective issues on this shared planet. What we've observed with COVID-19 is that those mechanisms, we knew it before, those of us practicing in the areas of human rights and in international law, and we understood the ineffectiveness of the mechanisms to really address all of the rights issues, particularly economic, social, and cultural rights issues within countries. So what we have sought to do in future law is to begin to develop a bottom-up professional movement of experts who have identified and are working to identify gaps in the collective infrastructure and see how we can create legal system change interventions at the local level that addresses our collective issues. And so that was the underpinning for all of these lawyers, over 180 lawyers coming together during COVID-19 to first start mapping those policies, and then to do the, what we call, we think it sounds sexy, meta-legal research, because it's about integrating the data that we're getting from the policies with the impacts in society, looking for the underlying connections, looking for the trends that are coming out. And remember, it's just a few months, less than 6 months we were doing this. And how we organized ourselves, Marian, is as network communities of practice. Some of them are quite fledgling. One has reached the point where our network community of practice on international trade and public procurement produced a paper in response to a call from UNESCAP. They wanted a paper research which could guide how we deal at an international level with crises in the future. And our collaborative was able to produce a paper which the UN has selected as one of the best papers out of the hundreds of papers that were submitted. And they are now working with us. Later this month, we are joining their expert group because we produced a paper that called for model crisis procurement provisions to be included in trade treaties. That was identifying a gap in the trade treaties and now looking to negotiate new provisions there. So there is, Anubha is quite right, there's no easy answer to your question, Marian. And how do we fix the UN? That's a huge issue. It's already tied up in the political power dynamics at the nation state level, because the nation state representatives are the ones that still are making decisions at the UN. There is not enough hard, effective mechanisms for the human being at a global level. And so while we agitate for that, for one person, one voice at the UN, which can take a really long time, we are identifying other mechanisms, some relying on the UN infrastructure. So for example, the treaties relating to civil and political and economic, social and cultural rights, we've identified as a legal system change intervention point, which is not really maximized. It's not really, opportunities there are not really maximized. So that's one of the areas that we are looking to support the infrastructure of the UN with these future law hubs that will be taking up these rights from the ground up. But also we are identifying outside of the UN structure, like the paper I just cited, areas that can be negotiated country to country and government to government with the help of their advisors from the ground up. You know, another type of infrastructure that does not necessarily need to go through the UN. So it's a very difficult question, and we are about the work. Our collaborative is about the work of figuring this out. It is experimental, but we have been blown away by the traction that we have received from lawyers and domain experts all over the world who join this effort. And just for this Future Law Virtual Summit, we've had over 1,500 registrants, and they are popping in and out, and we've had a load issue on our website. But all of these recordings are going to be available on the website and accessible to all. And so coming back to the discussion that we were having here, both of you raised this issue that came out as a huge issue in our research in this global COVID-19 policy response, and that is the extrajudicial killings and by the police force and police brutality more generally. And guys, for those of you who are not aware, in most of the, I would say, countries that are post-colonial states, there is, we saw that there was a correlation between that and police brutality, excessive police brutality during the time of COVID. And so one of the things we've identified is that there needs to be a new conversation at the global level, a global conversation on the future of policing itself and public safety. How do we deal with public safety? Because I have had the opportunity to live and work in Trinidad and Tobago from the Caribbean. This is where I'm from. And I've spent the last decade of my life in the UK. And I can share with those of us here that there is an entirely different relationship between the police in the Caribbean, where I am from, and from what I've learned from my African friends on the continent of Africa, what I've learned from my Indian friends on the continent of India. We have a very similar experience in these post-colonial states with the relationship between the police and citizenry. And here, it is in the UK and when I talk to and I visit other European countries and Scandinavian countries, the relationship with the police is very different, you know? And so we need to ask ourselves why that is so, right? And there is a historical legacy and truth. There's a historical violence, I think, that has to be addressed, that is still institutionalized today. And so that is certainly something that we want to identify going forward as an intervention point for us to think about. Let me see some of the comments.
I'm sorry, Margaret, just while you're reading that, I just wanted to add on the police brutality point. I think that the special rapporteur, I think on the right to life, I must double check, I'll go look for it, but Christoph Haynes, okay. He's busy working on something with regard to police brutality that is going to come out soon, if I'm not mistaken. So let me just go see that he's the special rapporteur of what exactly, and then I'll put it in the chat.
Yes, Marion, exactly. Thank you for giving me the academic language, Marion, a collaborative action research approach to enable continuous learning and change. Yep, that's the academic way of seeing it. Thank you, Marion. I'm seeing, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Severe is asking, making some comments, and I'll just read it out. Let's go further up. So it started further up. I'm seeing all of this. Well, we are in a Zoom room. Severe, do you want to come on and ask or share your comments on this?
Margaret, thank you. Yeah, my name is Svea, and I was very struck by Thandeka as we learned as we went. And I think that there's a new nobility and honor in learning as you go, instead of superimposing what you think you knew. So I think that there's a moral and ethical imperative that we're all experiencing, which is quite uncomfortable for some of the very entrenched systems. And so I wrote a few comments in the chat as I was listening, but perhaps just to say that I think that it's both a time of great opportunity to revisit what we believe science is, what we believe good research is, what we believe a whole lot of things are, and to stop believing, as in, you know, being so busy in our heads and even in our Zoom rooms, and getting back onto the ground and having a good look, like maybe a more anthropological grounded theory approach, is having a good look at what is, not what we think is, but what actually is. And I was really struck by some of what was being said right at the beginning about the situation in India. You know, is in a way to generate. I mean, I know it's a big ask, but and people would say that I am an ambitious optimist. I think I'm a pragmatist actually, but anyway, is to really generate policy, you know, with eyes, ears, and listening to conversations on the ground, and not generate policies, you know, really far removed. But I think, yeah, so I just put some comments in, you know, as I was listening. They were just my thoughts that were happening in my own mind. And I was just very encouraged. I'm just very encouraged. I also sort of feel like I want to go and print a bunch of t-shirts and mugs says, learning as we go along is good. Go for it.
For sure. For sure, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. Julia, you're making comments as well. We're in a small group. I'd love to invite you up to share your comments, because then you would be part of the recording. Yeah?
Okay, thank you everybody. Throughout this morning, I've been struck by when people have been talking about their experiences in India or in South Africa or in other parts of the world and their relationship with the police. I know this sounds odd, but it's very similar to our relationship in working class areas in England, and we don't experience protection. We experience coercion and risk of arrest, and then disproportionate arrests of young people, young men from our areas who are then lost to us. They don't help us look after anybody, but they do collect us and hurt us. I'm 60, I'm very well qualified, I work in the university, and I'm still terrified of authority and of getting stopped if I have a car. So I think it's important what you were saying, particularly what the people in South I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic, so what I hear I can understand, but what I see is harder. That with that experiment that we do, that we use the empirical data, because we have experienced brutal policing, and the same thing what you were saying about shops, some shops getting completely closed down, or some buying and selling systems completely disrupted, like our local market and traders, but big supermarkets can carry on as normal. And the same thing, we want to support our grandchildren and see our family, and we do a lot of the childcare for them, and we're not allowed to do that. So I just wanted to say thank you, but also I think the collecting the real information. I come from a background where I collect real information, and my community have intense and amazing skills of sharing, of love, of trust, of hope, and I guess that's what we're seeing. Forgive me for being hopeful, but that's, I see that love, and my neighbours share food. We give each other stuff. If we don't need it, we just give it to people. And the baby clothes, some people just gave all their baby clothes to another family who needed them, Anyway, thank you, sorry.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for jumping in and sharing that. I'd also like to invite Dr. Marian Gibbon to share, because you've been putting some questions and some interesting comments in there, Marian.
I found this conversation incredibly interesting, because it takes the work that I used to do in working in evolving countries, and having worked in Kenya, Sri Lanka and Nepal, and listening to what your speakers had to say, and then realizing that, as what Julia was saying, that many of our issues are very similar at one particular level, where we have very much disenfranchised communities in the UK are facing similar problems to those in the evolving countries as well. And I sat there thinking, in terms of public health, which is my area of expertise, and hearing Anubha's comments about the importance of public health, how do we, and I know that UN has one role to play, and so does WHO, but I think we need to be able to ensure that these comments that coming from the ground upwards, rather than only prescribing things, and this is why the embodiment element, that we bring our whole selves into these conversations, that we enable people to realize that vulnerability is important, and it enables people to connect and care about each other. And those are some of the things that I've also seen in Birmingham, where local communities have been caring for others. We managed to get childcare taken off the list of things you couldn't do, so that elders were able to look after their grandchildren, so that parents could go out back to work. I think there are many things that have been raised here. The Black Lives Matter protests that took place in Birmingham as well had suffered brutality. And the police actually have now been learning and talking with faith groups in Birmingham, and some amazing things are happening, which I really feel proud to have been part of.
Thanks for that. Marian. And I see Brian, one of our GCPR collaborative members, has joined us. Brian, are you there?
Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Brian, because probably you've joined us, so probably you can give a perspective. We're looking at the rights issues that were raised during the time of COVID-19. You are from Kenya, you're a Kenyan lawyer, qualified in the UK, Kenya, and Trinidad and Tobago, and you're now in Trinidad and Tobago. So you were instrumental in building the team that was mapping the COVID-19 policy responses across East African states and in the Caribbean, one of the trailblazers on the team. So we're looking at the rights issues that were that came up, and one of the things that were really brought out was the issue of police brutality and all of that, and that's where we were having that discussion, and public health issues and all of that. I wonder if you could just give a perspective, because I think it will add some richness to this discussion if we could get the Trinidad and the Caribbean and other East African states perspective.
Yeah, so essentially when we were doing this research work, we noticed that police brutality is a recurring theme. And growing up in Kenya, the background on police brutality, it really goes hand in hand, because it's we were in a dictatorship for about 26 years, well, from the second president, and everything was being done with an iron hand, with an iron fist rather. So if the president is not happy with whatever outcome, if the election has been rigged, people will be beaten into pulp, and that's that. So that trend has been picked up because we have special police units called the GSU, the General Service Unit. And whenever there's trouble, they're brought in and told, you know, beat them into pulp, and they'll keep quiet. And I've noticed the same thing about Trinidad. We have this sort of short form memory. So in Trinidad, I think they say you have 7-day memory. And in Kenya, it's the same thing. So you'll be beaten up, you complain, and then they keep it moving. And same thing happens in Uganda, because you have a dictatorship and President Museveni. And in Tanzania, they're not beaten as much, because Tanzania is a very socialist sort of country. But in Kenya and Uganda and Trinidad, actually, the clobbering of people was ridiculous. So police powers need to be reviewed. Executive powers, again, need to be reviewed, because like, for example, in Kenya, the country will outrightly defy the legal system. They'll defy the judiciary. So you're in countries where the executive is almost above the law. So we are hoping with the GCPR, we'll keep lobbying and changing policies and gathering momentum to get some system change going on. So that was actually my key observation. There's the recurring theme, and it's because of inadequate political and police systems, basically.
It must happen in every Zoom meeting. Somebody tries to talk and they're on mute. Right, there we go. Right, yeah, thanks, Brian. Are you all hearing me? You hearing me, Brian? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
I am.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And any other issues other than the police brutality that you were able to flag? Economic issues? Or?
Well, yeah. I think these things go hand in hand. Whenever there's a shortfall in the political system, basically the public health and every other strata in society is affected. So during the lockdown, there's no money going around, so people are broke. You get cases of people committing suicide because they cannot survive. You get the rate of theft is increasing. For example, in Trinidad as well, you get people breaking into people's houses because they want to survive. So the whole system is a mess. Once one piece of the jigsaw doesn't fit, the ripple effect is evident in all spheres of society, basically.
And I do want to take something up with you, because we have to pump what we can when we can. Yes. The Oxford University also they had their policy response tracker, which was excellent, really incredible resource that was being built. there. And they also created a preparedness sort of index. And they ranked countries according to their preparedness. This was around April 2020
Yes.
to ease the lockdown.
Yes.
And for those, this is very interesting fact that I share. Oxford University ranked Trinidad and Tobago as the number one country in the world, most prepared to ease the lockdown. That was in April 2020. And that was tickling because, you know, Trinidad and Tobago is just a tiny little dot on the planet. But I think there was a correlation between the size of a country and that went on there, and how the government's policies related to the management of the hospitals and the public care system. What I think was unique about the Trinidad and Tobago situation is that what the government did very early on, because there was this refugee crisis relationship going on with Venezuela as well, very early on, the government assigned certain hospitals as COVID hospitals and kept them empty and ready and waiting. And I think that was one of the defining, they locked their borders entirely. They're an island state, so a lot of people weren't going in and out, so our numbers were exceptionally low and were kept low for a long time. And then they created this excess hospital capacity. And so, I want to invite anyone else who has any questions. You have those who've been researching in Trinidad and Tobago and Kenya and South Africa and India here, or if you would like to share the experience of COVID in your country, it would be great because we can capture it in this recording. One of the things we are doing is the transcripts and the pulling out of all of these conversations over the 5 days, what we see as recurring issues that are being mapped, and also potential legal system change, intervention points and gaps. Does anyone else want to share? Yeah, Uthan.
Yeah, I would so much like. I jumped in a little late, but so I don't know if you told more about it, Anubha, but you mentioned all the changes in law and so on happening there. And
One minute, can you say what country you're coming in from, Uthan?
I'm coming in from Denmark, sitting in Denmark. And I was just wondering what kind of legal proposals and legal changes are happening there, and who are benefiting from them.
So let me just give you one example right off the bat, where I'm part of the sort of a very small team which is protesting it online. Of course, we can't protest outside. So we have the entire criminal justice system in this country, which is based on 3 specific laws. That's the Code of Criminal Procedure, the Indian Penal Code, and the Evidence Act. And we have those laws from colonial times. There have been very few changes that have taken place after independence, etc. And during the pandemic, the government has set up a committee which has been given a mandate of 6 months. 6 months beginning from April and ended now on 9th of October. Where they have to look at all the 3 laws, ask for suggestions from the public at large, and put them together and recommend changes. And how are they doing that? It's happening only online. Okay, there are questionnaires that they have set out. There are 6 questionnaires, only in English, only online. And initially they had a word limit. You could answer them only in 200 words. Then they changed that and they said, well, you can write your essays, but you can only submit your answers online, and that's it. Nobody knows what's happening. For example, and the kind of questions they're asking: should there be strict liability in criminal law? Should sexual offenses be gender neutral? And I'm giving you just 1 or 2 examples. Each questionnaire has close to about 45, 50, 60 questions, which require, for a lawyer practicing criminal law also, it requires a lot of, reading, discussion, with your community, with also understanding how this works out, and then responding. But the expectation is that you will complete your answers, you will submit them, and then we don't even know what's going to happen. Are they going to come out with a report? Are they going to really tell us how many people answered questions? Are they going to tell us how many, for example, on a question on whether sexual offenses should be gender neutral or not, how many said yes, how many said no, how many said maybe? I mean, what's going to happen? Completely opaque, not a transparent process at all, and something that cannot be done during a pandemic. That's the prime example of law change that is happening in this country, or attempts to law change that is happening in this country during a pandemic, where even lawyers, a lot of lawyers have lost their, lost their livelihood, have sold off their offices, have closed offices, are selling, have become hawkers. They don't have the money anymore. They can't practice law anymore because everything is online. And in that sphere, you want suggestions on change on criminal law, which is which is the basis of the criminal justice system in this country, which has been with us for close to 150 years, barring a few changes that happened after the independence. How can they expect that during a pandemic all of this can be done, should be done? What's the need? What's the hurry? I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I don't really want to comment on the inclinations of any government or any political party, but really, why now? This can wait. This is something that definitely can wait, but no, they don't want to. And that's one example. For example, another example is that we recently passed the Transgender Rights Act. And during the pandemic, they wanted to do the rule making for that law. And there is so much that is dependent on the rules for a law to be implemented. And you want to do the entire rule-making process, including public consultation during a pandemic. So I mean, these are two examples that I'm giving, but there are a huge number of such examples. So many laws, for example, the Farmers Acts, which got passed in the parliament without any debate, without speaking to farmer lobbies or anything. So yeah, those are some of the examples definitely which are extremely concerning and have taken place during the pandemic. I hope I've answered your question.
Definitely. Like, yeah. I can also answer. I need to go now. I will just shut the camera off, but I will be listening. Just to share also how it is here in Denmark and in the Northern European countries, like for me to experience, there's a general attitude of disbelief on the ground level. I see in people, where people really, like in the workers' communities, and also just in the general public, where the surface is the political correctness, where you police each other and you tell each other to put a mask on and so on. But just below that, which is much more compound and strong and shines more through, is this disbelief in it all, and this of breaking out of that surface and really beginning talking to each other and saying that it seems pretty overkill. For instance, that's a common view on the whole handling by the states and nations of the coronavirus. But at the same time, there's this, and that's just in general the society and the culture here. They are not connected, like the communities. There's no street communities, especially in Denmark, and I guess also in the northern countries. It gets so cold you cannot stay out anyways in the street half of the year. So there's no real connection in between people. So there's no gatherings in the same place. So basically that fills up in this tank of being submissive, of just following whatever you are told and doing nothing about it. And Danes here are really like that. They are really like following the norm, and for me, that I see that is a potential for a problem. That is a gap for human beings that have some power to legalize or illegalize something, to do so without any problem. And and step by step, it is just nearing up. And I can also just mention, like, quickly, I was at this Berlin demonstration, the 1st of September, where, according to the mainstream media, 17,000 people arrived, and they were non-maskers. And how the mainstream media described them was alt-right and and fascist and racist, like they do. And I was there for myself, and I saw people of every single kind, and just basic math could tell that there was, like, the real estimates were about 1.3 million people, from the cranes and the helicopters and so on. And I really saw there how dysfunctional and contrary to what actually physically exists, the media puts it out there. And there was people from every kind. I'm not a big demonstrator, I've never been, but I had to be there, and many others were also like that. It was mainstream people coming out there, and from that I saw this, that there goes the limit from where the governments and the state can remove and change the rights of the people. When people say physically in the street, no, and they are not afraid of the police. And exactly this, what goes on, that you cannot demonstrate and protest in the street. It's so, what do we do about it? Like, how can we get through? Because, like I said, 90% of people are going with this feeling of that this is not right, that there's something disproportionate in the handling of this. Like, and I can only tell what I know, what I've read. I don't know actually what I'm reading is true or false. But I can read, for instance, that the starvation of so-called third world countries have risen, like, by the thousands, near millions, not due to COVID, but due to the handling, due to the lockdown.
Yeah.
And this is just a problem that political correctness just suppresses being solved in this way. So I really see that as a big thing of how to connect. And people don't know, there's no website, simple website where you can go in and see what's going on right next door, what's going on in my own country, what laws are changed and so on. That could be a solution for me to see, for a simple website where you can follow up a wall, where you can step by step see, okay, now this here has changed by law in your community and so on. Simplify stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And we are hoping to get there, to have this map of the intervention points, and then how you can get there in your society and all of that. I see Mahela has a comment, but I'm looking at the time. What I want to do, this has been a very rich discussion. I want to thank Thandeka and Anubha in particular for really sharing with us the experiences in India and South Africa, and Brian coming in and giving us the perspectives from Trinidad and Tobago and Kenya as well.